have this event. Wow, 2020 has certainly been a year. And I know we were going to have this event in person in March, but things changed dramatically. I also want to thank the others that are on the agenda with me today. Julia, what a great conversation we just had, and thanks for that data. Before we start, I would like to ask everyone to think of a challenge that you are currently facing. And I want you to hold on to it, and I will return to that at the end of our time together. Next slide. One of my favorite African proverbs is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Together, let's pause. This is a notion of being with others in order to progress, something that you deeply believe in. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is related to this. And women, particularly women of color, we come from a lineage of collaboration, connection, support. It's this collective wisdom that we grow and we develop, we learn, we change, and we thrive. And it's a part of our history. Many of women's clubs at the turn of the century, even to today, have known that there is power in the collective. And this has been the same for me in my life, and what I've also brought into the pharmaceutical industry with women of color in pharma. Next slide. Yet the reality is, and Julia's data that she presented touched upon a lot of this, that we often find ourselves isolated. There is a ton of data that speaks to this in terms of Black women in corporate America. We just spent the past 30 minutes going through it. There's no need to take you through it anymore. But I will say that we find ourselves as Black women in corporate America less supported from managers and senior leaders, and we do receive less sponsorship. And in fact, I will say that we also struggle asking for help because we perceive that as a sign of weakness. I assert to you that when we work to change this dynamic, we can begin to learn from each other. We can hear other stories that will inspire us, empower us, and really give us the ability to position ourselves to lift as well as climb. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you some points that I believe contribute to the success of women in many industries, but particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. And those include sponsorship, which we heard a lot about, having those in power who advocate for you, not to just get you in the room, but when you get into the room, they really prepare the environment for you and allow for your ideas and your voice to be listened to and heard. And also networking. I'm going to introduce you to two women scientists who will share how these two things have impacted their careers. And then I'm going to leave you with some critical success factors or some resources on how you can gain more support and the impact that that can really have on your career trajectory. Next slide. I must say that I have experienced, researched, and written about health disparities my entire life. Whether it was my maternal grandmother, who I helped care for at a very young age when my single mother was out working, and she had diabetes and all the elements that went with that. And I recall helping her with her insulin and giving that to herself. Or whether it was my own mother who died at the prime of her life from lung cancer, or my father who died at the age of 60 from a heart attack. The fact is, and as you can see on this slide, it's not just in my family, but it's likely in yours too, that you've also experienced these healthcare disparities and the higher rates that impact Blacks, compared to whites when it comes to death rates related to chronic diseases. Next slide. And in fact, we are witnessing this today in this pandemic. As you can see here, Blacks are more than 2.5 times likely to die from coronavirus. Next. And in fact, if there were no disparities, then we would have 18,000 more Blacks, 6,000 more Latinos, 600 more Indigenous people, and 70 more Pacific Island Americans still alive today. And it's because of these numbers and these disparities that exist for almost all diseases that I became a physician. And it's my mission to really impact these numbers. Next slide. And over a decade ago, I had the epiphany that the best way for me to impact these numbers were not sitting in a clinical practice taking care of patients, but the way that I could have the greatest impact as a physician, scientist, and a leader was to join the pharmaceutical industry so that I could contribute to cutting edge research that would help us find answers and also develop innovative medicines. And I spend the majority of my time working with other smart individuals doing just that. But the compelling reality is that Black individuals and women and Hispanics are underrepresented when it comes to clinical trials. So this cutting edge research that I'm doing, I find that this community that I became a physician to impact is underrepresented. And there are many reasons, and we can talk about that for a really long time, more than I have today. It's very complex. What I know to be true is that the solution will be dependent upon the power of the collective. And what that means is that having many scientists and leaders who look like me, who share the same passion and purpose for advancing equity, is critical to us being able to have equity and inclusion in clinical trials. And like the African proverb says, if you want to go far, go together. Next slide. And so it is a journey, and I know that this journey matters. And I often keep in mind the memory of Henrietta Lacks and the contributions that she and her cells have made to medicine. I also want to acknowledge, I think it's really important to acknowledge the horrific way in which her cells, the HeLa cells, were taken from her body after she died, and the fact that her family did not consent. I think it's important that we make sure that we keep that top of mind. So not only is there triumph in her story, there's tragedy. But it makes me see that the role that myself as a physician scientist who is a Black woman and others, and you will meet too today, is so critical to us being able to advance racial and gender equality, as well as equity in health in the pharmaceutical industry. And I know, as I've stated many times, that this is only going to happen with the power that comes from building strategic networks and having sponsors. And this slide represents both of those things and the criticality that they've played in my life. My husband of 25 years and I have a very strong network. And it's only because of that network am I able to really do the things that I've been able to do. I found that when I was an undergrad at Washington University in St. Louis, there were a group of pre-med students who were Black, and we bonded together. Why? Because there was power in us being together. The task that was in front of us was so complex and difficult, becoming a physician, getting into medical school, which was the first step to do that. And then when I went on to medical school, I found myself at a medical school where there were many who looked like me, and many is probably an overstatement, but we then too bonded and had that network. So there was power. And when I came into this industry, into the pharmaceutical industry, I didn't see what I rely upon, which is the collective and a strong network. And so I've worked with other women to really build that. And I'm very proud of the organization that we've built. And I believe that it is through these networks and having sponsors like the ones that you see on the slide that have been critical to my success and will be critical to the mission at hand. And as I've mentioned to you, it's really to ensure that we have racial and gender equality. And why? Because health equity is on the line. And when we have these sponsorship as well as this strong network, I would assert to you that we have courage to ask for help. We have confidence to use our voice. We have visibility that's required to really gain the access to stretch assignments, priority projects that will be important. And we have the influence to be a change agent and really impact not only ourselves, but the development of others and our community. Next slide. I think we're off a little bit. Keep going. Next slide. Next slide. So now what I would like to do is have a brief conversation with two scientists who I have the honor to work with and who have really been successful in the pharmaceutical industry. And I thought it would be great for you to have a chance to speak with both of them. Next slide. So I'm going to ask Dr. Latoya Coffey and Dr. Abena Osewuso to turn on their screens, to turn on their cameras. And I'll start with Dr. Coffey. If you could please introduce yourselves to the ladies. Latoya, I think you might be on mute.
Okay, I was waiting for it to get unmuted. Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Latoya Coffey, and as Charlotte mentioned, I do have the pleasure of knowing and working with Charlotte for just a little time, but it's been very impactful. I want to say that I am an organic chemist by training, and I received my PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in chemistry, and I'm now 18 years later, the nephrology portfolio strategist at Otsuka Pharmaceutical Development and Commercialization. And I want to just share one piece in terms of the power of the network and how that really has impacted my career trajectory. I was in the lab as a chemist finishing up grad school, and I knew immediately that being in the lab long term was not what I wanted to pursue, that I wanted a different environment, that I wanted to join the pharmaceutical industry in business. And to do that, I needed to make a jump, and I needed to use my network because the people within my department and my resources were so focused on pushing me into the lab. And I really capitalized on an organization that had really helped me through grad school, which was the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. And I also tapped into the minority program directory of the School of Engineering. And I really pursued people and folks that will allow me to make that jump, that could guide me and that could introduce me into pharmaceutical sales, which I was able to make immediately, other than instead of what people were telling me that I needed to join the industry first as a chemist and wait 2 to 3 years, prove myself, and then try to make a transition. So the network was paramount, and I was able to move not only within the industry, but to make a jump from Philadelphia all the way across the country to California through my network and being introduced one person at a time, having those conversations and defining my next step.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for introducing yourself and sharing that. I would now like to ask Dr. Abena Osewusu to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all today. And so my name is Abena Osewusu. My name is a shout out to my heritage. I'm Ashanti from Ghana. And I'm an interventional cardiologist by training. I'm actually relatively new to industry. So I'm a Marylander by way of Ghana, born there, raised here, spent many years training as most physicians do. And I've always had a passion for helping the underserved and giving back to our communities, both here and abroad. That's basically how I was raised. To whom much is given, much is expected. And my journey has been that I went through all this training with an intention initially of helping patients at the bedside and through doing heart procedures as an interventional cardiologist. But as time went on, I really wanted to lean into my purpose more, which is having a global impact on the health of people, frankly, who look like me. And so it was a few years ago that through the power of my network, I was, presented this opportunity to come into pharma. It actually, was on my radar a little bit, but I hadn't fully leaned into it. And I would say that I have been greatly rewarded by that. And for me, very similar to Charlotte, I have seen the power of the network demonstrated from a young age. I, even at the stage of high school, was in a high school that was maybe 3% Black at the time, and we faced a lot of adversity related to systemic racism. We had an amazing collective that ensured our success, and this included our direct peers, it included our parents, and they all pushed us. This was replicated in college and at the medical school level, and to this day. The point being, we do not get here alone. And if we want to ensure our success, we do it together. And so I'm really grateful to be, part of this today, speaking about this so we can spread the word about, sometimes the vulnerability and the openness that is required to build your network and how we actually benefit from that.
Wow, thank you for that. One of the things that you just mentioned is the vulnerability that it takes to really open yourself up to be able to benefit from the network. I'm just going to ask you to speak a little bit more about what you mean by that.
So I think part of it, one, is realizing, being vulnerable and also some degree of humility is recognizing that you cannot do it alone and that you do need assistance. So many of us are extremely gifted in certain areas, and then we all have areas in which we desire to be stronger. So the first step is, I think, a self-assessment and saying, well, I could probably use some help here, and who can I surround myself with that actually lifts me up and helps me to reach, the higher goal and where my purpose is. And the next part, I think, is sharing that and being willing to share with others where the deficits may be, where you may need assistance as well. And that requires, what some may see as a weakness. I don't necessarily see it as such, because if you all have the same goal in mind, you're not going to view what I'm sharing with you as a vulnerability as necessarily a weakness, because you have in a shared interest in helping me to do better. So, and that's, I think, also part of the authenticity discussion as well. Sometimes our work environments can make it difficult for us to show up in an authentic manner. I think we really benefit greatly by doing so, but part of that authenticity is also about being vulnerable and showing who you truly are. I think when we do all of that, people get a better idea of who we are and also how they can help us. And so it's mutually beneficial to be, vulnerable in that way.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. Some of the data that Julia shared was around not having access to senior leaders. And I'm just wondering, Latoya, if I could just ask you off the cuff to speak to how you have gotten to know senior leaders, and when you find yourself in that place where you're interacting with the senior leader, how do you let them into your world to kind of get to know you?
And that's a great question, Charlotte. And it's interesting because earlier on in my career, I wasn't having access to senior leaders. And I had a manager who really wanted to understand what my next steps were, where did I see myself, and realized that I needed more visibility in order to make some moves. And she gave me the opportunity to and put my name in a hat to basically facilitate some of our highest executive governance bodies within the organization. And that was at first a role that I was a little uncomfortable with, but it provided me with a lot of visibility, which for me was very important. And having that opportunity to engage with senior leaders, you know, on a monthly basis, face to face in the room, hearing a lot of important discussions and seeing how decisions were made, and at times speaking up as, you know, I'm not the executive management, but I can tell you from my perspective X, Y, and Z. So I think that, you know, that was a wonderful opportunity, but it also, you asked the question of how I let them get to know me, was also to say, I'm not here just to facilitate your meeting, but I have a perspective and I'd like to share it with you. And that those opportunities becoming more visible has just led to additional opportunities coming my way, because now you're top of mind, right? They now know you outside of some deliverable or one presentation that you've done. You've developed a relationship. So that's been very important. And I think it's been critical for me to be comfortable being visible, which still is a work in progress, but I've definitely come a long way to be able to sit and talk and, you know, give my opinion with confidence and be able to challenge.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And I also noticed that what you said about being in the room, but also using your voice and
Mm-hmm.
having the confidence to speak up and say, I have a perspective,
Mm-hmm.
because you're in the room, and more often than likely, you're the only one that looks like you in the room. And therefore, your perspective is unique and needs to be included. And so I think that it's very important for us to know that as well. Next slide. So what we thought we would do is just share with you what we think are some critical success factors. And I'm just looking to see if we can have the next slide. Yes. And I'll go through these, and many of them, both Abena and Latoya have hit on. And it's really critical to make sure that you're comfortable being visible. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become. That we normalize the need to ask for help. I know we've talked about that. It's challenging for us. We have that S on our chest in many different aspects of our lives, but it really is important to ask for help. No one can do this by themselves. That you build a team to support you and your development. And I see in the chat that many people are talking about the board of directors. And you probably should have more than just one board of directors. You should have one where you work, one in your personal life. You get the point. It's important to make sure you have those critical people who can really advise you. That you gain access to stretch assignments and also opportunities to have experience leading. And Latoya mentioned that, you know, out of the conversation she had with her manager, they identified that she needed to be more visible, and putting her into really managing and leading governance committees with executives. Wow, that's a stretch assignment. Having the confidence and the courage to really articulate and pursue our goals. I also think that this came through with Latoya at the beginning of her career. I mean, she had received her PhD, but then decided that she wanted to make a turn, and that wasn't the direction that she wanted to go in. So she had to be able to articulate that, and then to really pursue her goals. Imagine if she had come into the industry and gone into a lab. She probably not wouldn't have been happy, and may not have been where she is today. Understand and communicate your unique value and story. And I've already spoke about that, but I can't say enough. And for me, I had to realize that my story mattered, and that it was a different perspective, and it definitely needed to be brought into the room. And I still find myself reminding myself of that and challenging myself to open my mouth and really share my perspective and my story. And then also committing and investing time and resources in your self development. Even if your company is not willing to do that for whatever reason, it's important that we seek out professionals, coaches, um, going to conferences, the continuous learning that is needed for us to thrive. So I thought what I would do is ask our two scientists to look at this list and share with us one that they know they've mastered. They kind of knocked it out the park um, over time, and they got it. Abana, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think that for me, understanding and communicating my unique value and story, yeah, I got that, and the reason being, you know, I'm comfortable with who I am. I know who I am, and I know that someone like myself is unusual in the space that I'm in. And that's been the case as both an interventional cardiologist, being a Black female, women interventional cardiologists are only about 5%. And if you look at Black women, we're probably going to be, 0.1 or 0.2% of all practicing interventional cardiologists. And in the current space, I do have a unique set of experiences. I'm an immigrant and child of immigrants. I'm Black, I'm female. I've worked in a variety of settings. I've taken care of all types of patients, whether it's in an academic setting or private practice or completely underserved or frankly in other countries. And so my voice matters, and being able to articulate that beyond what people see on a CV or when they see me, and to also follow it up with the goods has aided me immensely.
Great, thank you. And Latoya, how about you? Which one have you got it?
I think it's the first one at this point. I'm very, very comfortable being visible. There's many times where people have asked, will you present on behalf of the team? I say yes. I know I have a team there to share and back up, but I'm happy to represent, and I'm happy to be able to meet new people. And I know that every opportunity that you're visible, there's an opportunity that you're meeting someone new, that you're expanding your network, that you're broadening your reach. So that's the one I think that is the top of my list right now.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're all works in progress and we're all on a journey. So which of these are you working on? Abana?
Ooh, yeah. So I would say that I am still working on what Latoya has mastered, right? And that interestingly, I am someone who is a dancer and I'm used to performing, but I'm certainly an extroverted introvert. And being visible and being comfortable with that visibility is something that is definitely a work in progress. But what I have noticed is that when I have been open to it and being very visible, and I can think of some instances where I was given opportunities in my current employment to be very visible, I've been deeply rewarded by that. And so, it's definitely positive reinforcement to do so and to gain comfort in that. And I think it's also important for others to see me being visible, right? So it's not just self-serving. It actually changes the entire environment when I am visible to others and people know who I am, and they know, and basically that they see Black excellence, right? So I'm becoming a lot more comfortable with that over time, but I know that there's still some work to be done.
I love that. Yes, they need to see Black excellence.
Yes, all day.
And Latoya, what about you?
It's interesting. I had the courage and the confidence to articulate where I wanted to go when I knew I didn't want to be in the lab, but I still think that I'm working on that. Just recently, I just taken a new position as of February and I'm getting comfortable with it. And somebody asked me, what's next? And I thought, wait, I'm still right here. Like, I can't believe you already asked me about my next step. But I thought, you know, I've got to be comfortable putting it out there because I should be thinking 2, 3 steps, or, you know, there are more rungs on my ladder, right? And so it's okay to already be talking about what next, because now you're planting the seed and people are saying, oh, I remember you were thinking about X, here's an opportunity. So I've got to continue to develop that story. My story can't be just about now, but I've also got to be sharing where I want to go a little bit more comfortably and consistently.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining me. I could spend all day talking to you and listening to your insights. And I know that those who are listening to you could also. And before we open it up to take questions, let's just go to the last slide. And I want to conclude our discussion here today. So I hope that I've convinced you that it's critical that you have a network and that you have sponsors, absolutely critical to your success. And sponsors really pick you, you don't pick them. But in order for you to have someone pick you, the things that we've talked about, the 7 critical success factors must be in play. You must have courage. You must have the confidence. You must have visibility. So that you can then have someone identify you, to sponsor you, and you can continue your journey to becoming an influential change agent. I've given you examples through both Abena and Latoya in terms of how these things can make a difference, both sponsorship and having a network. And I hope that I've demonstrated to you why it's really important that we have this collective, particularly within the pharmaceutical industry, and the connection that that has with the health of our communities. So with that, I'm going to ask you to bring back to the forefront of your mind that question that I asked you in the beginning, which is, where are you, what challenge are you experiencing right now? And I want to ask you to dig into your soul and think about how you can draw upon the power of the collective to get help in achieving the challenge that you're going through. And for me, I just want to say that today starts 75 days of a huge challenge that I've accepted, to be more mindful in terms of what I'm eating, in terms of my physical activity. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but I've drawn upon those in my network. Dr. Abena is one of them, to join me. And that's just one more way in which I draw upon the power of the collective in my life. So thank you, Chardonnay. I'm going to turn it back over to you. You're on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Jones-Burton. Thank you, Latoya. Thank you, Abena. I really love the emphasis on the power of the collective. And thank you, ladies, for all being so vulnerable and for sharing your stories with us. I've heard the passion that each of you have for what you do. So we have time for a few questions. I want to say thank you to all the participants who have been actively participating in the chat, even networking with each other. So they already are getting some of these gems that you ladies are dropping. Remember that you can use the raise your hand feature if you click on participants. And don't be shy, we wanna see you, we wanna hear you. But there was a question in the chat that came across from Amanda Colas, and several others echoed her sentiments. And I think this was around the time that you were showing your slides and sharing the underrepresentation of our community in clinical trials. So Amanda shared, around the underrepresented women, I have a question. Do you feel that is partly due to lack of trust within our community and the health industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I mentioned, it's very complex and complicated, and absolutely mistrust in the African American community based upon the atrocities that have happened to us. One of which is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment that happened. There are others. I went to medical school in the Baltimore area, and there were others at Johns Hopkins University, and you probably have heard of some yourself. I think that there is this foundation of mistrust. I am optimistic that we can overcome that, but I know it's critical to have physician scientists like myself and leaders who look like myself working to bridge with our communities and working with our community leaders to really help repair the mistrust that exists. And there are other things that that we know contribute to this underrepresentation. There are biases that physicians have who are investigators who don't offer the opportunity for individuals to be in clinical trials. There are things like, we need to work, and it's difficult the way that the clinical trials are developed for us to be a part of them. So it is multifactorial. But I do want to acknowledge what you said, and I agree with what you said, essentially in terms of the mistrust. Abena, Latoya, do you have anything additional to add to that?
I think you hit the main lack of trust, and then also I think I don't know if when patients are out that they're being offered and they really understand and they have the resources to do some of the research and get a better feel of clinical trials and what it really is about. I think we all have, those of us in the industry have a responsibility to help our community be more trustful and to give that deeper understanding of what it's about, especially right now with COVID-19 and the numbers of people of color, African Americans in those trials is very low.
And also work to ensure that some of the structural racism that we see within the industry, we're working on making sure that we call that out. Number one, I spend a lot of time calling it out, and two, partnering with my colleagues to come up with solutions as well.
Thank you, ladies. I don't see any raised hands yet, so I'll go to your question that from the chat. This one was specifically for Latoya, and Janelle Job asked, how do you maximize the opportunities where you're visible? So specifically post-event or presentation or during the moment, how do you maximize those opportunities for yourself?
So like I said, I think one thing is you're in the room for a reason. And, I have to be very intentional in terms of speaking up, because there can be times where, you say, oh, well, someone already said that, and so I'm not going to repeat. And I don't like to repeat, but I really think about and try to listen to what I'm hearing in the room and how I can respond and add to so that I'm speaking and I'm not just there as a quiet participant. The other piece is after something's been said, if it catches my interest, following up offline, say, hey, I'd like to talk with you deeper on X, Y, and Z. We didn't get to go in detail, but I'd like to give you some information. I think those follow-ups, people really, when you're listening and you've heard what they want to say, they want to talk more about what they want to talk about, right? And if you're really interested, you have something of value to contribute, those follow-ups are very, very important. And like I said, just, when people give you the floor, take it. Some of my hesitancy, and Charlotte can attest to it, sometimes like, oh, I got to process that. I'm getting more quicker in saying yes, and not, let me get back to you.
Awesome. I love that, following up on something that interested you after the meeting, because that's how you grow that one-on-one relationship. Thank you so much for sharing. There is another question that came through the chat. I think we have time for one more. And Shadisha Abby Matthias, I hope I didn't butcher your name, Shadisha. She shared, I think Black women have challenges sharing their story. So I'd like to hear more about how others have developed their story, and how you got comfortable in sharing it.
Abena, why don't we have you take that question?
Yeah, that is a great question. And so what I'll tell you a little bit of a story in answering this question. I'll say always kind of been comfortable with who I am, and that I'm a little bit not, kind of straight across the grain. I am a Ghanaian woman. I got locks. I'm super Afrocentric, and I bring all of that to the workplace, right? But I really had to go through an exercise, and this happened when I was given an opportunity with an employee, group last year during Black History Month, where I actually had to tell my story. And I was like, wait a minute, as comfortable as I may be, to sit and think about it and how to deliver that in a way that was meaningful, it made me do some self-reflection. And I think the point is, everyone has a story. Your story is your points of connection. Your story is how other people see themselves in you. And that's how we connect and move forward and grow in the workplace. And what I found in doing that exercise, actually having to write my story down and then deliver it to, a very large audience, was that it led to a huge amount of, it was one way in which I, was identified by a sponsor. And so it might be a reasonable exercise, even if you have not been tasked to do so yet, to actually just write your story down. One page, doesn't have to be super long. Who are you? How did you get to this place? And what do you want people to know about you? And then you will get to a point where you can refine your story and maybe tell that story in 4 or 5 sentences so that people can kind of get a gist of who you are, your beliefs, your values in a very succinct, amount of speech. But that's why I shared my story. I believe that I'm valuable, and that my story is valuable, and that people like me should have their story told. And so it was really interesting to receive the feedback that I got after sharing it. It actually made me a lot more comfortable with doing so in the future. So it was really a good way to grow. I would say that.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And I'll go back to something that I mentioned before, which is investing in your self-development. And everyone should have a coach. And this is one exercise that you can work with your coach on, as Abena mentioned, writing it down. So there's some work that you have to do to prepare to share your story and what points are going to be important for you to get across. But your coach can definitely work with you on that. And if you don't have a coach and you haven't made that step yet, call your best girlfriend and kind of go through the exercise with them.
All awesome pointers. I want to thank all of you ladies for sharing. This has been just so amazing so far. Everyone is engaged in the chat, and we're having a good time, and there's more. So to get us ready for our next amazing speaker, I'm actually going to turn it over to Vivette Henry, who is the head of HR Organizational Effectiveness, Diversity, and Inclusion at AIG, our fabulous sponsor.
Hello, good afternoon.